The sky over the Kentucky hills darkened with unnatural speed, clouds clawing across the heavens like blackened fingers. Rain hadn't yet fallen, but the scent of it, earthy, electric, hung thick in the air. Evelyn Brooks drove alone, hands tightly gripping the steering wheel of her Ford Model A as the narrow country road twisted through the dense woods. Her eyes flicked to the faded map on the passenger seat, where a red circle marked the destination, Abernathy Estate. A place she hadn't known existed until 3 weeks ago. The letter had arrived without return address, written in ink that bled at the edges, claiming she was the last living heir to the Abernathy name and entitled to the family's ancestral home. There had been no mention of inheritance from her father, no stories about Kentucky roots, just that strange envelope, a will signed in 1921, and a lawyer in Lexington who seemed as relieved to pass the deed as she was to leave the city behind. The car creaked to a halt at a rusted iron gate. The sign hanging askew read simply, Abernathy. Vines choked the bars, but she could just make out the crest, 2 ravens perched atop a crowned skull. Evelyn stepped out, boots crunching wet gravel, and shoved the gate open. It groaned like something waking from a long sleep. Ahead, the mansion loomed through the trees. A 3-story monolith of rotting wood and stone, its shuttered windows blank as eyes in a skull. Ivy clung to every inch of the exterior, swallowing balconies, strangling statues. Lightning flashed, and for a second, Evelyn thought she saw movement in the upper window. But when thunder followed, it was empty again. She climbed the front steps slowly, the wood sagging beneath her weight. The key turned with effort, rusted into the lock like the door hadn't been opened in decades. Inside, darkness swallowed her whole. Dust clouded the air, motes dancing in the beam of her lantern. The scent was thick, mildew, age, something metallic beneath it. The grand hallway stretched before her, lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her every move. Men in old military coats, women in Victorian gowns, all pale, all stern. At the end of the hall, a sweeping staircase rose into shadow. Evelyn didn't move toward it yet. Instead, she wandered into what must have once been a drawing room. Velvet chairs eaten by moths, a fireplace choked with ash, shelves lined with cracked books. She ran her fingers over a piano whose keys gave no sound. A sharp bang echoed from upstairs. Her body jerked, breath catching. She called out, "Hello?" But silence answered. Just the moan of the wind through broken panes. She wasn't afraid. Not yet. Evelyn had always been drawn to what others avoided. Abandoned buildings, forgotten letters, ghost stories her mother used to tell before she passed. History was her obsession, and mysteries were meant to be solved. That's what had led her here. That, and the nagging sense she was chasing a part of herself she'd never known was missing. From her coat pocket, she pulled the deed again. It was real, official, signed by a Judith Abernathy. The name echoed in her head as she moved through the house, every step creaking on ancient floorboards. In the dining room, she found a long table covered in a linen cloth, stained brown with age. A set of silver cutlery was still arranged for 12. Above the hearth, a faded family portrait stared down. A man, a woman, 3 children. Evelyn leaned in, breath catching. The woman. She looked just like her. Wind howled louder now, and outside the trees thrashed like they were screaming. Thunder rolled again. She climbed the stairs slowly, gripping the railing for balance. The second floor was colder, as though the house resented her intrusion. She passed a series of doors, all closed, until one at the end stood slightly ajar. Inside, dust coated everything. A rocking chair faced the window, and beside it sat a tall bookshelf with a single journal on display. Brown leather, its spine cracked, and on the cover, the name written in delicate cursive, Judith Abernathy. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she picked it up. She hadn't known what she expected to find here, maybe old bills, a ledger, forgotten heirlooms, not a diary, not the personal thoughts of a woman she'd never heard of, but now shared blood with. Lightning flared again. Outside, the storm had arrived. Rain lashed the windows, and the house groaned under the wind's weight. But Evelyn barely noticed. She sat down on the edge of the dusty bed, opened the journal and began to read. If you have found this, it means the walls still whisper. The first line was enough to make her heart thud harder. Evelyn didn't know it yet, but she had just cracked the lid on a story far older and far darker than anything she'd ever imagined. Before we open these forgotten doors, subscribe for more stories like this one. Dark, haunting, unforgettable. The journal felt heavier than it looked, as if it carried more than pages, memories perhaps, or something deeper, darker. Evelyn cradled it in her lap while the storm raged outside. Each raindrop on the windows echoed like footsteps in a vast cathedral. Thunder cracked, and for a moment the light from her lantern flickered, casting the room in flickering shadows that danced along the peeling wallpaper. She hadn't yet opened the book again. That first line still echoed in her mind. If you have found this, it means the walls still whisper. What did that mean? Whisper what? To whom? She rose, deciding to explore further before settling into the unknown secrets written by Judith Abernathy. She couldn't quite explain the sensation that crept up her spine, like being watched by 1,000 unseen eyes. The air in the upstairs hallway felt heavier than before. Each breath tasted of mildew and dust. At the end of the corridor, she found a room that must have once been a study. A large oak desk sat beneath a stained glass window, cracked in 3 places. Shelves lined the walls, most empty, though a few volumes remained, their leather bindings curled and brittle. A rusted lamp hung above, and in the corner stood a tall cabinet with a lock that refused to budge. She tugged at the handles anyway, curious. They didn't give. Figures, she muttered. She tried again. Nothing. On the desk lay a single item, a brass key. Intricately carved, it looked oddly ceremonial, far too ornate for a simple lock. Evelyn picked it up and turned it over in her palm. No label, no tag, just a key waiting for purpose. She slipped it into her coat pocket. The wind screamed suddenly, high-pitched and human-like, causing Evelyn to jump. From below she heard something shift. Not a creak this time, but a definite dragging sound. She froze, straining to hear more. Nothing followed, just the throb of the storm pressing against the house like a living thing. Back downstairs, she lit 2 more lanterns from the ones she'd brought. The mansion had no electricity, at least none that worked, and only half the fireplaces seemed intact. She explored the kitchen, untouched since the 1920s. Pots hung on rusted hooks, a cast-iron stove loomed in the corner, and a porcelain sink stood dry. Evelyn opened a pantry and recoiled at the stench. Something had rotted long ago and been left to ferment. Near the back of the room was a narrow servants' staircase, almost hidden behind a hanging curtain. She climbed halfway before a sense of unease crept over her. Something about the narrowness, the closeness of the walls, how they seemed to lean in. Halfway up, the lantern dimmed again. She turned around. A cold breeze brushed her cheek. She descended quickly, almost stumbling. It was getting late. Her legs ached, her stomach growled, and sleep clawed at her, but curiosity burned hotter. She returned to the bedroom upstairs, the one where she'd found the journal, and cleared the dust off the bed enough to lay her pack down. She didn't plan to sleep yet, not while questions loomed. Evelyn lit a fresh candle and opened the diary again. June 4th, 1851. Thomas has taken to pacing at night. I hear him whispering to himself near the cellar door. He says it listens, that something answers. I laughed once, only once. I don't laugh now. The handwriting was precise, elegant. Judith Abernathy's voice emerged with clarity through the ink, her words calm, but with a thread of quiet terror woven beneath. Evelyn flipped to another entry. June 9th. The children are afraid. Nathaniel swears he saw shadows crawling along the hallway. Clara won't go near the parlour. Thomas won't eat. He speaks in riddles. He sleeps in the library now, saying the bed breathes too loudly. Evelyn sat back, eyes fixed on the page. The way Judith described Thomas, her husband, sounded less like madness and more like transformation, as if the man she married had been taken and replaced by something wearing his skin. She flipped further. June 11th. The house creaks in ways it never has. I lit a fire in the hearth to drive away the chill. but the flames cast shapes I don't recognize. I thought I saw my mother standing in the mirror. She's been dead 10 years. A chill settled in Evelyn's bones. These weren't idle thoughts or romanticized fears. These were lived horrors written with a clarity that felt like truth. She closed the diary and looked around the room. The shadows had lengthened. The corners were darker than they should be. She lay back against the mattress, still clothed, listening. At first, nothing. Then, a soft scratching. It came from behind the wall near the fireplace. At first, she thought it might be rats. Then she remembered something from the diary. The walls whisper. Evelyn sat up, every muscle tense. The scratching stopped. She waited. Nothing. And then, just as she began to convince herself it was her imagination, a whisper so faint it barely registered. He never left. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She sat upright on the edge of the bed until dawn, the diary clutched in her lap, the words "he never left" circling her mind like crows above carrion. Every creak in the wood, every gust of wind rattling the windows made her flinch. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, but the house felt awake, aware, and worse, it felt hungry. When morning finally peeled away the darkness, she rose with stiff limbs and went downstairs. The kitchen stove was useless and she made do with a biscuit and cold water from the jug she'd brought. The journal remained in her hands, its pages drawing her deeper into Judith's world with every word. June 15th. Thomas hasn't spoken to me in 3 days. He writes in a book I'm not allowed to see, and he's taken to locking himself in the cellar at night. I hear him murmuring to something that murmurs back. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She remembered the cellar door. She'd seen it the day before, just off the hallway near the dining room. It had been chained and sealed with a thick padlock. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now it felt like the very heart of the house. She continued reading. June 18th. He says the land is older than time, that before the settlers came, before even the native peoples walked it, there was something beneath the soil. He calls it the listener. I beg him to stop, but he says it already knows my name. Something shifted inside her, not fear, something sharper, a grim curiosity. She turned another page. June 20th. I found symbols scratched beneath the floorboards in the nursery. Circles, triangles, crude drawings of eyes. Thomas denies it, but Nathaniel says he saw his father doing it with a knife. My hand shakes as I write this. I think I saw something move in the mirror again. A drop of sweat slid down Evelyn's neck despite the morning chill. The way Judith's entries progressed reminded her of descent, an unraveling, steady and measured, like a drowning woman describing the water inching up her throat. She turned to the last page, written in the same smooth hand. June 22nd. He brought something up from the cellar. I don't know what it is, but it smells of ash and rot. He placed it in the old study and says it's a vessel. The children cry constantly now. I fear I've already lost him. Evelyn's breath hitched. The old study, the room with the locked cabinet. She stood, heart pounding, and pulled the ornate brass key from her coat pocket. There was only one way to know. Back in the study, the light was weaker, filtered through grey clouds that had returned with unsettling speed. She knelt before the cabinet, inserted the key, and turned. With a sharp click, the lock gave way. Inside was a velvet-lined interior, red faded to brown. At the center, nestled like a prized artifact, sat a strange object, a sphere carved from obsidian or something darker, etched with faint symbols that shimmered when her fingers got too close. The air around it felt different, not colder, heavier, like the space itself resisted being occupied. Evelyn's hand hovered inches away before she pulled back. Suddenly, from the hallway, a sound. A child's laugh, soft, fleeting. Then silence. She turned sharply. "Hello!" Her voice cracked. Nothing. She returned to the cabinet, grabbed the sphere with a piece of cloth, and wrapped it quickly. The moment it left the cabinet, the air in the room lightened. She didn't understand what she was holding, but it didn't belong there anymore. That night she brought the journal back to bed. Thunder had returned in the distance, and rain beat a soft rhythm against the shutters. She flipped through the earlier entries looking for patterns. Then she found it. May the 29th. My husband began digging in the cellar. He said he heard something knocking from underneath. He came back with dirt on his face and blood on his hands. He wouldn't say whose. The words blurred for a moment as Evelyn blinked, her breath shallow. May 31st. He placed his hand on my stomach and said, "The house wants more." The hairs on her arms rose. A gust of wind slammed a window somewhere in the hall. She stood quickly, pacing, needing to move. Then she heard it again. A whisper. Only this time it came from inside the room. She turned slowly. The mirror across the room had fogged over slightly, despite the cold, and on its surface, traced in condensation, were 4 words. "You brought it back." Evelyn didn't sleep. Not after the mirror. Not after the words. She watched as the condensation faded, the message dissolving into the glass like breath into wind. For the first time she considered leaving, but something held her there. Not just fear, something deeper, something like obligation. The next morning arrived shrouded in fog. The hills beyond the window disappeared behind a pale curtain. Evelyn clutched Judith's journal tighter than ever. She knew the answers were here, buried in ink, tucked between days of torment. Somewhere within those pages, the truth waited. June 25th. Nathaniel asked me today why the house hums at night. I told him it was the wind. He shook his head. "No, Mama," he said. "It's saying names." The name struck her, Nathaniel. She hadn't paid attention to the children before. But now, as she reread the entries, they came into focus. Judith had 3, Nathaniel, Clara, and Gideon. The entries grew increasingly centered on them as Thomas deteriorated. June 27th. Clara refuses to speak. She stares at the well behind the house and won't come inside until nightfall. When I asked her why, she whispered, "Because that's where they live now." Evelyn shivered. The well. She'd seen it through the kitchen window. Half swallowed by vines, its stone ring cracked. At the time she hadn't thought twice. Now it clawed at the edge of her thoughts. June 30th. Gideon sleepwalks. I found him standing barefoot in the library, humming to himself in the same tune Thomas whistles when he thinks I can't hear. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "Listening to Grandfather." But both our fathers are long buried. That was the moment Evelyn understood. Whatever had claimed Thomas was reaching into the children, through blood, through dreams. Judith was helpless to stop it. She placed the journal down, opened her leather satchel and pulled out a notepad. She began sketching a crude family tree, Judith and Thomas at the top, the 3 children below. As she wrote the names, she paused at one, Nathaniel Abernathy. A chill spread through her limbs. The name felt familiar. She flipped through the documents the lawyer had sent weeks ago. There, an old census record. One of her great-grandparents had been listed as N.A. Brooks, birth name, Nathaniel Abernathy. Evelyn's pen slipped from her hand. She was not just a distant relative. She was blood, direct blood. A sound stopped her breath. A plunk. Then another, like droplets falling into water. She followed the sound through the back door, across damp grass, toward the well. The fog made the air feel viscous, clinging to her like webbing. The stones of the well were slick with moss. She stood over the edge, listening. Plunk. She lowered the lantern. Nothing but blackness. "Clara," she whispered, not knowing why. No answer. Only the sound of water echoing up the shaft. She turned to head back, then stopped. Something lay in the grass. A child's ribbon, faded pink, soaked through with dew. She picked it up with trembling fingers. Back inside, she returned to the journal. July the 2nd. Clara is gone. The words hit like stone. She went missing before dawn. Gideon says she walked into the woods with the smiling man. Nathaniel says she fell into the well. Thomas just laughs. I've torn the house apart. Her doll is still in the bed. Her shoes are missing. Her voice lingers in the stairwell when no one's speaking. Evelyn dropped the book. Her skin crawled. Clara was 8 when she vanished, Judith had written. The year was 1851. No records of burial, no explanation. Only stories passed down, if any at all, but the well remained, and the ribbon had not rotted. She returned to the parlour, where the family portrait hung crooked above the cold fireplace. She hadn't looked closely before. Now she saw them. Thomas, in a stiff black coat. Judith beside him, hands clenched. Nathaniel and Gideon, boys with hollow eyes. And Clara. Clara in a pale dress. No smile, just a faint bruise beneath her left eye. Evelyn reached out and touched the glass. A spark. The glass went cold instantly, frost spreading outward from her fingers. She yanked her hand back, her breath fogged in the air, and then she heard it. A laugh, high-pitched, fragile. It echoed from the hallway behind her. She turned slowly. No one was there, but something small and pink lay at the threshold, a second ribbon matching the first. Judith's words rang in her ears. Her voice lingers in the stairwell when no one's speaking. Evelyn picked up the ribbon. It was tied in a perfect bow, fresh, as if someone had just placed it there. She whispered, "Clara," and waited. No reply, just a silence so thick it pulsed like a heartbeat. But Evelyn understood now. Clara was not gone, not entirely, and the house was far from finished. The storm returned that evening, hammering the mansion with wind and rain as if trying to force its way inside. Evelyn sat at the dining room table, the journal open in front of her, ribbons clutched tightly in one hand. She lit every candle she could find. The darkness pressing at the windows felt alive, crawling over the glass like fingers tapping to be let in. She didn't speak, not even to herself. The silence of the house was filled with the memory of Clara's laugh and the certainty that it hadn't been imagined. She turned the page. July the 4th. He has painted the cellar with symbols I cannot read. I caught a glimpse before he locked it again, circles within circles, marks carved deep into the stone. He says they're protection. I know they're not. They're invitations. Evelyn's chest tightened. She looked toward the hall. The cellar door had remained shut since the moment she arrived, thick chains still across it, but it had started to draw her attention as if gravity pulled more heavily there. July 6th. He calls it a communion. I heard him chanting last night, words that hurt my ears though I don't know their meaning. He burned something. Flesh, I think. The smoke made the walls sweat. The children slept through it all, but I did not. Evelyn flipped to the next entry. July 8th. He invited me to witness it. "So you can see what I've done for us," he said. I refused. He smiled anyway. His teeth looked wrong, too many. She stopped. The descriptions were no longer metaphor. Judith was seeing changes in Thomas that defied nature, and still she stayed. Still she protected her children. Evelyn wondered how many nights Judith had endured like this, sleeping beside a man who no longer blinked like a man. July 10th. I heard Clara singing again, only it wasn't Clara's voice. It came from her throat, but the tune was something else entirely, something I remember from a dream I had years ago, before I met Thomas. Evelyn's hand trembled as she turned the page. July 11th. I found a knife under Nathaniel's pillow. When I asked where he got it, he said, "Father gave it to me to protect us." I asked from what? He said, "From the rest of him." She paused. The rest of him? There was no more room to deny it. Thomas Abernathy had become something else. Whether by madness or by the hand of whatever he had uncovered beneath the cellar, he was no longer a man. He was something wearing the memory of a man. She stood and moved through the hallway, lantern in hand, until she reached the cellar door. The chain looked older than the house itself. The padlock had no brand, no numbers. It felt cold, despite the warmth in the room. She knelt, ran her fingers along the wood. Scratched into the frame were symbols, just like Judith had described. Circles intersecting, lines that made her eyes ache if she stared too long. And there, faintly carved beneath them, a word. Shadem. Evelyn whispered it aloud and immediately regretted it. The lantern flickered. A groan echoed from below. Not wood settling, not pipes shifting. Something deeper, something alive. She backed away, heart pounding, and returned to the parlor. Her breath came fast, unsteady. She grabbed the journal again, flipping rapidly through the pages until something else fell from between them. A folded parchment. She opened it. It wasn't Judith's handwriting. The ink was smeared, erratic, furious. "The house is a gate. The blood is the key." The first opened it. The last will close it. There was no signature. She stared at the words, tried to breathe, tried to process. The first opened it. Thomas, the last... Her. She was the last Abernathy. Another gust of wind struck the windows, and in its wake a sound. Not outside, from within. A low hum, rising from the floorboards. Evelyn dropped the parchment and stood. The sound was growing like a choir in reverse, voices folding in on themselves. Then silence. Utter, suffocating silence. She stepped into the hallway. The cellar door was still shut. But the chain lay on the floor. Evelyn stared at the floor. The chain that had secured the cellar door for God knows how long now lay coiled at her feet, like a discarded snake. The padlock, once firm, was split cleanly in half. The metal edges melted and warped. She hadn't heard it break. Hadn't heard anything but the humming. And now even that had vanished. Her first instinct was to flee, run, get in the car and never look back. But her legs refused to move. She stood rooted in place, drawn forward as if the house itself demanded her descent. She backed away slowly and returned to the kitchen. Her hands trembled as she poured a glass of water. It slipped from her grip and shattered on the floor. She dropped to her knees, trying to collect herself, heart thundering in her ears. Then her nose began to bleed. At first it was a trickle, then a steady stream, warm and metallic. She pressed a cloth to her face, staggering to the sink, eyes wide with alarm. She'd never had nosebleeds before. The air in the room felt thick, greasy, like oil in her lungs. Her head spun. In the mirror above the basin, she looked wrong. Her eyes were sunken. Her skin had taken on a grey hue, and behind her, just over her shoulder, was a shape. Tall, still, and silent. She spun around. No one. Just the doorway, but the image in her mind lingered, and then something moved in the mirror again. Her reflection blinked, but she hadn't. She stumbled back, nearly slipping on the water, and blood pooled at her feet. The diary. She needed the diary. She fled back to the bedroom and opened it with shaking fingers. July 12th. I bled from my nose today. I felt the walls breathe. I cannot explain it, but I swear I saw them shift, as if inhaling. Something in this house is alive and it is waking up. Evelyn gripped the pages until they tore. July 13th. I heard my voice call to me from the attic. I did not go. I won't. I won't. The words were scratched in haste, ink smudged by what looked like tears. July 14th. I touched the doorknob to the cellar today. It burned my palm. I looked later and there was no mark, but the pain remained. Evelyn turned her gaze to her own hand. Her fingertips tingled with a faint numbness. The pages continued. July 15th. Nathaniel no longer speaks. He watches from corners. His eyes are not his own. Gideon hums in his sleep. They speak in tongues I've never heard. Thomas says they are preparing. I do not know what for. Evelyn's stomach turned. She closed the journal, breathing hard. From the hallway came a new sound, scraping, slow, deliberate, like fingernails along wood. She rose to her feet and followed it, each step measured. At the end of the hallway stood the large mirror that had fogged the night before. It was pristine now, polished like glass at a funeral parlor. She approached, heart pounding. The reflection showed her hallway, but with differences. The wallpaper in the mirror was fresh. The sconces glowed with candles. And there were shadows moving. A family at dinner. She saw them. Thomas, Judith, the children, all seated at the dining room table, motionless. Then Thomas turned. Not in the mirror, but behind her. Evelyn wheeled around, empty hallway. When she looked back, the mirror was blank, just her, and a message scratched faintly across the bottom edge of the glass. The house consumes what it knows. She staggered backward, breath shallow. The journal had said that too. The floorboards beneath her creaked. Another step, not hers. She ran to the study, slamming the door behind her. Her breath came in ragged bursts. In the quiet, she heard something faint, a whisper, not outside the door, from inside the walls. She pressed her ear to the paneling. A voice, soft, chanting. Not in English, not any language she knew. She stepped back, shaking her head. "No," she whispered. "No, this isn't real." The wall bulged, just a ripple, barely perceptible, but it moved. The house had heard her. The morning after the walls moved, Evelyn awoke on the floor of the study, her lantern long since gone cold. Her head throbbed. She didn't remember falling asleep. Her last memory was the ripple, how the wall had pulsed under her touch like muscle. She sat up slowly, unsure whether she was more exhausted or terrified. The journal still lay open beside her. Judith's voice was the only anchor she had now. The woman's words had become scripture, a map through madness. Evelyn flipped ahead, searching for the final entries, heart sinking with each line she read. July the 16th. I found Gideon sitting in the cellar doorway, humming to something that wasn't there. His eyes were bleeding. Thomas smiled when I screamed. He said the house was almost ready. The handwriting had deteriorated, uneven, rushed. July 17th. I tried to leave, took the boys by the hand and ran at dawn. The gates wouldn't open. The carriages are gone. I walked for hours, but the woods circled back to the house. The sun never moved. Evelyn's fingers trembled. She looked to the window. The morning light outside was dull and lifeless, like a sky painted by a hand that had never seen hope. July 18th. I dreamed I was buried beneath the cellar, not dead, just waiting. When I woke, my hands were covered in dirt. I don't know how. The next page was smudged with something dark. July 19th. I locked the cellar, hid the key in Clara's doll. Thomas screamed all night. He is no longer him. His voice is layered, 2-3 tones at once. The children hear it and obey. Evelyn gasped, standing quickly. Clara's doll. She remembered Judith mentioning it. Had she seen it? Yes, on the second floor, in the nursery. She'd avoided that room, out of instinct more than fear. But now she had to go. She forced herself to keep reading first. July 20th. Nathaniel found the key. He didn't tell me. He opened the cellar. I heard the chanting again. The same sound that started this. Thomas has them now. I only have one choice left. Then came the final entry. The words were barely legible, scratched deeply into the paper, as if the pen had been pressed too hard. July 21st. If you read this, don't stay here. The house is not haunted. It is hollow, and it wants to be filled. The roots are deeper than the walls. The bloodline is the door. Burn it all. Burn everything. Evelyn let the book fall from her hands. Her mouth was dry. The air seemed to constrict around her. Don't stay here. She ran. Up the stairs, past the paintings that now seemed to shift in the corners of her eyes. The nursery door creaked open before she touched it. Inside, the air was ice. Dust danced in shafts of grey light. The crib stood untouched, and beside it, on a child's chair, sat a porcelain doll, its eyes cracked, lips painted in a soft smile. Evelyn knelt, lifted the doll gently, heavy. She turned it over, no obvious opening, but the head slightly loose. She twisted, the porcelain gave way, and inside the hollow cavity, wrapped in dry cloth, was a small iron key. The cellar key. She took it and stood slowly. A whisper brushed past her ear. Don't. It was a child's voice. She turned. The room was empty. The doll slipped from her hands and shattered. The house groaned again, as if sighing. Evelyn clutched the key and stepped backward from the nursery down the stairs, heart pounding louder than her footsteps. Judith's last words burned in her mind. Burn it all. She looked toward the front door. The fog had thickened. The world outside was barely visible, but her car was still there. She could leave. She could run. But she wouldn't. Not yet. Judith had tried, and Judith had failed, because the house doesn't let them go. And Evelyn understood something now. She wasn't just reading this story. She was finishing it. The key felt hot in Evelyn's palm, as if the house itself had noticed. She didn't yet unlock the cellar. She couldn't. Not until she understood what waited beyond. Judith's warnings still echoed, burn everything. But something deeper had rooted Evelyn in place. A feeling that this wasn't just about Judith or Thomas or the children. This was about her. She returned to the library and pulled out the stack of old documents the lawyer had mailed with the deed. Among them was a thin leather-bound notebook with initials pressed into the corner, N.A. She opened it. The handwriting was different, sharper, more jagged, not Judith, Nathaniel. The first page was dated 1875. I do not know why I write. Perhaps to remember what they've tried to make me forget. Perhaps to punish myself. Evelyn's chest tightened. It was I who killed him. The line was underlined twice. Father was no longer father. I do not believe he was ever just a man. But the thing he became, whatever it was, needed to be stopped. Mother begged me not to, but he had taken Gideon, he had taken Clara, and she was no longer herself. Evelyn turned the page. It happened on a night like tonight. Rain, thunder. I waited in the library with the knife. He knew. He smiled. He said, "Finally." He didn't fight. He just watched. When he fell, the house screamed. I heard it in the walls. She sat back, stunned. So it had been Nathaniel, not Judith. He'd ended Thomas's life. But had that ended anything? No. Judith's last entries were years later. Afterwards, I buried the blade in the orchard. Mother locked the cellar again. She said we would never speak of it. But I hear them still. My sister in the well. My brother beneath the stairs. My father in my dreams. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she flipped ahead. I tried to live. I married. Had a son. But the voices followed. My wife drowned in the river behind our home. My boy vanished when he was 8. They told me it was wolves. I know better. She froze. His name was Elijah. I don't know if he survived. If he did, he would have changed his name. Buried the truth like I tried to. Evelyn's mind raced. Elijah. Her grandfather's name was Elijah. Elijah Brooks. She pulled the census sheet again. Nathaniel Abernathy. Elijah Abernathy. Listed once, then gone. But on the next page, Elijah Brooks. Adopted into a mining family. No parents listed. She whispered, "I'm his great-granddaughter." Her pulse pounded in her ears. The house hadn't called her randomly. The bloodline hadn't vanished. It had looped, all the way back to her. She turned to the final page of Nathaniel's notebook. I feel it inside me now. The sickness, the humming. I see Clara in the windows, Gideon beneath the bed. I will not let it pass again. I will end it here. I swear it. But there were no records of Nathaniel's death, no grave, no obituary, just his silence and his son's new name. Evelyn clutched the book to her chest and whispered, "I'm sorry you couldn't." She stood, steadied herself, and moved through the house. The walls were quieter now, but not silent. She heard a low whisper threading through the wallpaper, a hum without melody, like breathing. When she reached the second-floor landing, she paused. The family portrait at the end of the hallway had changed. She stepped closer. The background was the same, the furniture unchanged. Judith still sat in her black dress. Thomas, standing, but Clara was gone. And in her place stood Evelyn. She stumbled back, breath caught. The paint wasn't fresh. It had always been this way. Hadn't it? She couldn't trust her memory anymore. That night she dreamt of Nathaniel. He stood beneath the twisted tree in the orchard, shovel in one hand, eyes sunken but kind. He said nothing, but as she approached he turned and pointed to the ground. Evelyn woke in a cold sweat, still clutching the notebook. She knew what she had to do. Evelyn spent the morning digging. The earth beneath the orchard was stubborn, packed with decades of roots and silence. Her hands blistered, her back ached, but she didn't stop. She didn't even hesitate when she struck metal. A box, rusted at the edges, sealed with wax. Inside, the knife. Though its blade was blackened, hilt wrapped in cracked leather, there was something etched along the edge in a language she didn't recognize. Harsh, jagged symbols like teeth. This was what Nathaniel had buried. Not just a weapon, a relic. She didn't know how long she sat there, staring at it. The wind shifted. A scent followed. Myrrh and ash. And then a voice. "Put that down, Miss Brooks." Evelyn stood sharply, turning toward the stranger. A man in a long black coat stood just beyond the orchard line. His hat shadowed most of his face, but his voice carried weight. Calm, certain, old. His hands were empty. No weapon, no threat. "Who are you?" she asked. He stepped closer. "My name is Callahan. I'm a priest, of sorts." She narrowed her eyes. "Catholic?" "Not anymore," he replied with the trace of a weary smile. "How do you know my name?" He glanced toward the mansion, then back to her. "I've been watching this house a long time, and I knew your great-grandfather, Elijah, though he called himself something else back then." She stepped back, fingers tightening around the knife. "Don't be afraid," he said gently. "If I meant you harm, I wouldn't have waited until now. What do you want?" "I want to help you end it." She didn't lower the blade. He nodded toward it. "You found the killing tool, Nathaniel's blade. You already know what it is, don't you? Even if you don't understand it." Evelyn hesitated. "What is it?" He took a breath. "An anchor. A key. It's not just what killed Thomas. It's what bound him to the house. Blood opened the gate, blood sealed it, but not all of it." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" Callahan stepped closer. "This land predates our names for evil. Before scripture, before superstition, there were things we whispered about in caves and dreamt of in fire. Shadem, the listener, the root below. They don't need worship, just memory. And this house remembers too well." Evelyn felt a chill crawl down her back. "My grandfather, he tried to stop it." Callahan nodded. "He tried. He came close, but the house is smart. It infects through grief, through guilt, through silence." She swallowed. "And now? You're the last of the line," he said simply. "The last name, the last key. Which means you're the only one who can finish what they started." "How?" He looked toward the house again. "There's a ritual, one older than anything the church ever dared translate. You'll need the blade, the altar, and your blood." Just enough to seal it. You won't die, not if we do it right, but you'll need help. The house will fight you." Her mind raced. "And you?" "I've faced this kind of thing before. Not like this, but close. I've seen what happens when it wins. I won't let that happen again." For the first time, Evelyn allowed herself to hope. Just a flicker. She lowered the knife. "Then tell me what we need." Callahan smiled, grim, tired. "First, we prepare. Salt lines, sigils, candles that burn in both directions." "And we'll need the sphere," she frowned. "The one from the cabinet?" He nodded. "That's the vessel. It holds the echo. Without it, the ritual won't take, and we only get one shot." Evelyn turned toward the house, its windows black, its walls whispering. She whispered back, "Then let's end this." The sun never fully rose the next day. Grey clouds pressed low over the hills, casting a pale, endless dusk over the estate. Evelyn and Callahan prepared the ritual with steady, deliberate movements, salt in every doorway, symbols chalked in the corners, candles placed with care. The mansion felt like it was watching them, testing their resolve with every flicker of light, every whisper in the walls. By mid-afternoon, they gathered in the study. Evelyn laid out the journal, the knife, the sphere, and Nathaniel's notebook. Callahan unfolded a sheet of parchment, aged and brittle, covered in symbols that seemed to twist when stared at too long. "This is older than any of us," he said. "Even the ink resists being seen." Evelyn looked to the blade. "Tell me the truth. Will this really work?" Callahan didn't answer right away. Instead, he lit the candles, 12 of them encircling the space. Finally, he said, "If the blood is right and the will is strong." "Yes." She nodded, her heart pounding. But before the ritual began, she needed answers, ones no book could give. "What happened to Gideon?" she asked. Callahan looked up sharply. Evelyn met his gaze. "Judith's youngest son. No one mentions him after Nathaniel's entries. There's no record of his death, and the diary says Thomas had him." Callahan's face tightened. "I was hoping you wouldn't ask that, but you deserve the truth." He sat across from her, hands folded. "I came here once before, 1892. I was young, reckless. I'd heard stories, missing travelers, strange lights, singing in dead languages. I didn't believe any of it, not until I stepped onto Abernathy land." Evelyn listened, breath still. "I met a boy then, not a child, not a man, alone, wild-eyed. Said his name was Gideon. He didn't speak much, but he knew things about me, about the world. He lived in the attic, slept during the day, mumbled in his sleep, always drew circles on the walls." Her skin went cold. "He survived?" "In a way," Callahan said. "But he wasn't whole. Not after what Thomas did." "What did he do?" Callahan hesitated, then said, "He offered Gideon to the listener. Partially, not body, not soul, just self, like carving out a piece of someone and leaving the rest behind." Evelyn's voice cracked. "And he lived? He escaped, vanished. Years passed. Then I heard a new name surface in the Appalachian Hollows, Elias Gideon, a man with strange eyes, a healer, a preacher, a name passed from whisper to whisper." Her heart stopped. "Elijah Brooks," she said softly. Callahan's eyes locked on hers. "I believe Gideon left this house, changed his name, and fathered a child." "A child who became your grandfather?" Evelyn staggered backward as if struck. "You're saying—" she whispered. Callahan nodded. "You're not descended from Nathaniel. You're Gideon's line." Her breath came in gasps. "But how can that be?" He stood slowly. "You are what the house couldn't predict, a broken link, a hidden key. That's why it called to you. Not out of vengeance, but necessity. You are what remains, and you are what ends it." Evelyn collapsed into the chair, reeling. All this time she thought she was the inheritor of guilt, of failure. But she was something stranger, a secret, a shadow the house didn't know it had cast. And now she was back to finish it. The room darkened suddenly, though no candle had gone out. Callahan's voice came low. "It's time." The mansion held its breath. Evelyn could feel it, an unnatural stillness thickening the air, as if the walls anticipated what was coming. The candles burned taller now, flames swaying without wind. In the center of the study, Callahan marked the floor with the final sigil, a spiral of salt enclosing the knife, the journal, the obsidian sphere. He stood back, sweat beading on his brow despite the cold. "It begins here," he said softly. Evelyn stepped forward. Her hand trembled as she drew a shallow cut across her palm, letting her blood fall into the bowl before the sphere. The drop hissed as it landed, the surface of the stone shifting in its reflection. "Speak your name," Callahan instructed. She did. "Evelyn Gideon Brooks." The house moaned. The floor groaned beneath them, not from age, but as if something stirred deep below. A vibration passed through the room, unsettling the salt slightly, but the lines held. Callahan opened the parchment and began the incantation. The words were guttural, ancient. The language clawed at her thoughts, trying to rewrite them. Evelyn clenched her jaw and focused on the bowl of blood, now glowing faintly red. As Callahan chanted, the shadows shifted. At first, small things, flickers along the corners. Then, shapes began to form. Judith. She appeared by the fireplace, her dress torn, her eyes hollow. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just watched. Then Nathaniel emerged beside her, older, gaunter than in the portraits. His mouth was sewn shut. And finally Thomas. He came from the mirror. Evelyn froze. His face had not decayed with time. It had changed, stretched. His eyes were wide and empty, the sockets too deep, the skin around them bruised black. His mouth smiled but did not belong to a man, too wide, too toothy. The room darkened around him. Callahan continued the chant, voice rising. The sphere pulsed. Thomas stepped forward, crossing the edge of the salt circle, and was stopped. He hissed, a sound like boiling oil. "Child of blood," he said, not with his mouth, but through the walls. "You open what should remain." Evelyn took a shaky step forward. "You've had your time. It ends tonight." Thomas laughed. The walls echoed with it. "I am not ended. I am past. Through blood, through voice. Through dream. You wear his face. You carry her name. You are both door and key." The flame of one candle extinguished, then another. Callahan's voice wavered, but he kept chanting, faster now. Evelyn dropped to her knees and placed her bleeding hand on the sphere. It burned instantly. A surge of heat shot up her arm and into her skull. She gasped. The room fell away. She was no longer in the study. She was in the cellar, but not the cellar as it was. This one breathed. The walls were flesh. The symbols carved into the stone writhed like worms. And in the center stood Thomas, younger, smiling. Judith screamed behind her. Gideon curled on the floor. Nathaniel held the blade. And Evelyn saw herself in all of them. Thomas turned. "You've returned," he said. "You always do." She stepped forward, unsure how she moved, unsure if this was memory or dream. He opened his arms. "Complete the circle." She shook her head. "No." She raised her bleeding hand, and with all the force her voice could summon, she shouted a single word, "No!" The cellar exploded into light. The memory shattered. And she was back in the study, gasping on the floor, her hand still on the sphere. Callahan dropped to his knees beside her. "It's working," he whispered. "You severed the anchor." But the shadows were not gone. Judith, Nathaniel, they had vanished. But Thomas remained. And behind him something else now stirred, something bigger, something hungry. Evelyn knelt in the flickering light, her blood pooling beside the obsidian sphere, her breath shallow and sharp. The shadows writhed now, not just along the walls but above them, stretched across the ceiling like ink in water, forming limbs, faces, half-memories. The air thickened with a pressure that clawed at her chest, every inhale a battle. Thomas remained. His form flickered, at times human, at times monstrous. His voice, when it came, reverberated through the floorboards and Evelyn's bones. "You cannot kill what was never alive." Callahan rose slowly, his voice hoarse. "We don't need to kill you. Just close the gate." Thomas turned to him. "You are not the one." And with that, Callahan flew backwards, slammed into the far wall as if tossed by invisible hands. He groaned, but didn't move again. Evelyn cried out and crawled toward him, but Thomas stepped into her path, that too wide smile curling. "You carry him, you know," he said, circling her. "Gideon's blood, my gift. The house never forgets." She clutched the knife. "You gave nothing. You stole everything." "And still," he hissed, "here you are, completing what I began." The floor pulsed beneath her knees. The salt circle fractured. The sphere trembled, heat radiating off it in waves. Then came the voices, low, layered, familiar and foreign all at once. Evelyn clamped her hands over her ears, but it did nothing. The voices were inside her now, whispering her name, showing her visions. Judith burying Clara's doll in the attic. Nathaniel sobbing as he held the bloodied knife. Gideon, face blank, humming to the cellar walls. Her. Standing at the top of the stairs as the house burned around her, flame licking the wallpaper like tongues. The voices pulled her downward, toward memory, toward surrender. But then another voice broke through. Small, fragile. "Don't let it take you." "Clara," Evelyn gasped, eyes flying open. Across the room, near the cracked mirror, the little girl stood, dress torn, eyes soft with sorrow. She lifted one hand and pointed at the sphere. "You have to choose," Clara whispered. "Stay nor end it." The air shook. Thomas snarled and turned, voice now distorted, not just his, but many. "She is mine." Evelyn rose. "No." She picked up the knife, sliced her forearm, and let the blood pour into the sphere. The black stones screamed. The house reeled. From every wall, every mirror, every portrait, faces burst forth, screaming, clawing, reaching. Ancestors and victims alike, children, strangers, echoes. Evelyn didn't flinch. She reached into the bowl of blood, submerged her hand, and felt the heat surge through her like lightning. She screamed, but held firm. Visions overtook her. She was Judith, giving birth in the dark, the walls chanting. She was Nathaniel stabbing his father, whispering forgiveness as the blade sank deep. She was Gideon standing at the edge of the well, whispering, "It's still hungry." And finally she was herself, standing alone, holding the sphere, facing Thomas. "You're not my legacy," she said. "You're the wound, and I'm the closing hand." She raised the knife one last time. Evelyn didn't hesitate. The knife plunged into the sphere, and it shattered like obsidian under pressure, sending a shockwave through the room. A pulse of sound followed, a sound so deep and resonant it seemed to unmake silence itself. The mansion trembled. Thomas howled. His form unraveled before her eyes, no longer flesh, no longer even a ghost. What remained was a silhouette of smoke, held together by voices, by memory, by pain. "You cannot sever me," he cried. "I am the root." "You're rot," she spat, blood dripping from her arm. The walls cracked. From the corners fire erupted, not orange or red, but pale blue, cold and hungry. It caught on the wallpaper, the curtains, the portraits of long-dead Abernathys consuming lineage like dry leaves. Callahan stirred, coughing, his eyes wide. "The ritual. Did it work?" Evelyn helped him up. "It's working." The fire licked the ceiling now. Behind Thomas the floor gave way. Not to earth, but to something vast and black and infinite. A void opened, sucking wind and flame into its core. Evelyn felt it pulling at her too, at her blood, her bones, her memories. It wanted her. Thomas's voice twisted, becoming a chorus. "You are part of me." "No," she growled. "I'm the end of you." Then Callahan moved forward, placing himself between Evelyn and the void. "I know the cost," he said. She grabbed his arm. "No." But his eyes were calm. "This house has been waiting for blood. Let it have mine." Before she could stop him, he stepped into the center of the sigil, raised his arms, and spoke a final word Evelyn didn't understand, but the house did. It screamed. The flames surged. The shadows shrieked. Thomas exploded into mist, scattering like ash. The void collapsed inward, consuming itself. The study shattered. The walls blew out. Evelyn was thrown back, through glass, through time. When she awoke, she was lying in the front yard, the sky above her churning with smoke and light. The mansion was on fire. Real fire now, red, hot, alive. She stood, staggering. Her arms were cut, her side bruised, but she was whole. She limped back to the threshold. Inside, everything was collapsing, beams falling, glass exploding, heat searing her skin. But amid it all, she saw them. Judith, standing in the parlor, watching the flames rise. Clara in the nursery doorway, holding her doll. Nathaniel by the staircase, blade in hand. And Gideon, no longer a boy, no longer lost, watching her with sorrow and pride. She nodded once, and they vanished. Evelyn stepped out just as the roof gave in. The mansion fell, brick, wood, bone, gone. She dropped to her knees in the grass, watching the inferno consume over a century of suffering. The sky above cleared, no more whispers, just the crackle of flame and the deep, unshakable silence of a chapter finally closed. The town of Fair Hollow sat quiet beneath the summer haze, unaware of the fire that had erased a legacy just miles beyond its hills. Evelyn arrived there 3 days after the blaze, exhausted, bruised, but alive. No one asked why she looked the way she did. Perhaps they saw the smoke on the horizon and simply chose silence. Some towns know better than to ask questions they don't want answered. She found a small room above the old general store and paid with cash. No luggage, just a satchel containing a scorched notebook, a knife wrapped in cloth, and a photograph she'd taken from the ashes. A half-burned image of the Abernathy family, faces warped by heat but eyes still intact. The first week she didn't speak to anyone. She walked the outskirts of town, visited the local library and scoured archives, not for escape, for confirmation. She found it in a local folklore collection, an old journal kept by a coal miner in 1903. They say the house up near Briar Hollow used to speak, that the trees bent toward it, and children born near there died with eyes too black. One fella named of Callahan came through in 92. Said he saw things, said one day someone would finish the job. Her hands trembled as she copied the entry. Then she found another, written decades later, by a woman who claimed to hear humming beneath her floorboards at night. But no one mentioned the mansion anymore, because it was gone. And so Evelyn turned inward. She began to write. She started with the facts, the inheritance, the house, the journal. Then came the nightmares, the voices, the blood. She didn't shy from the details. She described the cellar, the sphere, the ritual. And finally, she wrote about Callahan, how he gave his life to finish what began long before she was born. She titled the manuscript The Abernathy Affliction. By the 3rd month, it was finished. She didn't send it anywhere, not yet, but she printed one copy and placed it in the care of the local librarian, sealed in an envelope marked "Do Not Discard." She told the woman behind the desk, "If something like this ever happens again, you'll know where to look." The woman, eyes tired but kind, nodded without asking questions. Evelyn left the library and stepped into the sunlight. It had been months since she last bled from the nose. The headaches were gone. Her sleep was dreamless, but the silence was never complete. There were days she could feel the air shift, nights where she heard a familiar tune hummed beneath the floor. Still, she stayed, because some places needed remembering, and some stories, no matter how dark, deserved to be told. She became a regular at the market, taught local kids about Appalachian history, helped catalogue cemetery names for the town archive. She wasn't running anymore, she was remembering. One evening, walking home past the edge of the woods, she heard laughter. A child's. She turned slowly. No one was there. But tucked in the branches of a dogwood tree, she found a ribbon, pink, faded, tied in a perfect bow. She picked it up, smiled faintly, and said, "Thank you," then kept walking. Winter came early to Fair Hollow. Evelyn sat by the window of her small apartment above the store, tea cooling in her hands, manuscript beside her in a weathered folder. Outside, children built snowmen under the grey sky, their laughter light, free, unburdened. She envied them. The dreams had returned, not as often, but enough. They weren't violent anymore, just strange. Shadows of voices, flickers of fire. She always woke before the endings. One morning a letter arrived, no postage, just her name, handwritten in spidery script. Inside, a photograph, an estate. Grand Southern colonial, untouched by time, and a note. "To the last Abernathy, there's another. Virginia. You've been expected." Evelyn stared at it for a long time. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but something in the curl of the A made her think of Judith. She didn't pack, not right away. Instead, she walked to the cemetery at the edge of town, where the oldest stones leaned like sleeping men. She placed the ribbon there, Clara's, and whispered goodbye. Then she returned home, locked her door, and opened the journal one last time. On the final page, where before there had been nothing, now there were new words. History never forgets what was sealed in blood. She blinked, ran her fingers over the ink. It didn't smear. The house was gone, but the legacy wasn't. Evelyn sat down and began to write again. Not a warning this time, a preparation. Because some bloodlines do not end in fire, they ripple, they echo, and sometimes they return. You just have to listen for them. And she knew now, others would. Others would feel the pull. Somewhere another Evelyn was waiting, and when her time came, maybe this story would find her. If you've stayed with this tale through every whispered secret, every candlelit descent into the dark, thank you. But be warned, the Abernathy name isn't buried. It waits. And if you ever hear something humming in your walls and don't answer, just leave. Now. If this tale chilled your soul, subscribe and follow the next descent. And don't forget to click on the video waiting for you here. It leads deeper still.